Welcome to Human Stories. Before we continue with this incredible true story, tell us in the comments which city in the world you're watching this video from today. And if you think stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being part of IT.st. Mary's hospital had seen its share of dedicated staff members, but few were as invisible as Marcus Thompson. For 2 decades, he had worked the night shift, moving through the corridors like a shadow. His blue maintenance uniform was always clean, his equipment always organized with military precision. The doctors and nurses knew him by sight, but rarely by conversation. He was the kind of employee who kept his head down, did his job, and never asked questions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been working at St. Mary's for 3 years, ever since completing her residency. At 28, she was one of the youngest attending physicians in the hospital's trauma department. Her mentor, Dr. James Harrison, had recently retired after 40 years of service, but his influence on her approach to medicine remained strong. Dr. Harrison had been more than just a teacher. He had been like a father figure during her most challenging years of medical training. His stories of his time as a military medic in Afghanistan had shaped her understanding of trauma surgery and emergency medicine. But among all his stories, there was one that he told more often than others: the story of his best friend and fellow medic, Marcus Thompson. According to Dr. Harrison, Marcus had been the most skilled field medic he had ever known. They had served together for 3 tours, saving countless lives under impossible conditions. Marcus had an almost supernatural ability to keep soldiers alive in situations where death seemed certain. He could perform complex medical procedures with whatever materials were available, improvising solutions that trained surgeons would struggle to implement in fully equipped operating rooms. But then, during their final deployment, something had happened. Dr. Harrison had never been specific about the details, but Sarah understood that Marcus had been involved in an incident that had changed him fundamentally. One day he was there, and the next he had simply vanished. No forwarding address, no contact information, no trace. Dr. Harrison had spent years trying to find his old friend, but it was as if Marcus Thompson had simply ceased to exist. The hardest part, Dr. Harrison had told Sarah during one of their late-night conversations, is not knowing if he's alive or dead. Marcus was the kind of man who could disappear completely if he wanted to. He had skills that went beyond medicine, survival skills, intelligence training, the ability to become invisible. But he was also carrying wounds that nobody could see. I just hope that wherever he is, he found peace. Sarah had always been moved by her mentor's obvious pain at losing his friend. She had seen photographs of the 2 of them together, young men in desert camouflage, grinning despite the harsh conditions around them. In those photos, Marcus Thompson had been a vibrant, confident young medic with intelligent eyes and an easy smile. The contrast between that image and the mystery of his disappearance had always haunted her. It was during a particularly quiet Tuesday night that Sarah first really noticed Marcus, the maintenance worker. She was leaving the trauma bay after a long surgery, exhausted and looking forward to getting home, when she saw him in the corridor. He was methodically cleaning the floors with the same precision she had observed countless times before, but something made her pause. Perhaps it was the way he moved, economical, efficient, with a bearing that seemed more military than janitorial. Or perhaps it was simply that she had been thinking about her mentor's stories earlier that day. Whatever the reason, she found herself studying the maintenance worker more carefully than she ever had before. He was older than she had initially thought, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult experiences. His build suggested someone who had once been in excellent physical condition, but had allowed time and circumstance to soften the edges. There was something about his posture, the way he held himself, that reminded her of military personnel she had encountered during her rotation at the VA hospital. As she watched, Marcus looked up and caught her staring. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw something there that made her breath catch. Intelligence, yes, but also a wariness that seemed to go bone deep. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and was always ready for trouble. "Evening, Dr. Mitchell," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a formality that most hospital staff had long since abandoned with her. "Good evening," Sarah replied, realizing that this might be the first time they had directly spoken to each other despite working in the same facility for 3 years. Marcus returned to his work, but Sarah remained in the corridor, something nagging at the back of her mind. There was something familiar about him, something that went beyond their casual encounters in the hospital hallways. Over the next few nights, Sarah found herself paying more attention to Marcus. She noticed that his work routine was incredibly systematic. He cleaned the same areas in the same order every night, with a precision that spoke of ingrained habit. She noticed that he seemed to know the hospital layout better than staff members who had worked there for decades, moving through back corridors and service areas with the confidence of someone who had memorized every possible route. Most importantly, she noticed that he seemed to observe everything around him with an intensity that went far beyond what his job required. He was always aware of who was coming and going, always positioned where he could see multiple exits, always ready to move if necessary. Revelation came during the following weekend. Sarah was working a double shift, covering for a colleague who had called in sick. It was nearly midnight, and the hospital was quiet except for the usual sounds of life support machines and distant conversations. She was in the break room, trying to stay awake with her third cup of coffee, when Marcus entered to empty the trash bins. The room's fluorescent lighting was harsh and direct, and as Marcus reached across the table to collect some discarded papers, his sleeve rode up slightly. That's when Sarah saw it. On Marcus's left forearm, partially hidden by his sleeve, was a faded tattoo. It was a military insignia she recognized, the caduceus symbol surrounded by distinctive markings that indicated a combat medic. But it wasn't just any combat medic insignia. The specific design, with its additional elements and unit designations, was one she had seen before. In her mentor's old photo album, Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the table and spilling dark liquid across the surface. Marcus looked up, concerned, and moved to help clean up the mess. "Are you all right, Doctor?" he asked, grabbing paper towels from the dispenser. Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. The tattoo was exactly like the one Dr. Harrison had described from his old army photographs. The same design, the same placement, the same unit designations that marked someone as having served in the most elite medical units during the Afghanistan conflict. "Your tattoo," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus froze, his hands still holding the paper towels. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Marcus pulled his sleeve down to cover the tattoo completely. "I should finish my rounds," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Wait," Sarah said, standing up. "Please. I need to ask you something." Marcus paused at the doorway, but didn't turn around. "Did you know Dr. James Harrison?" Sarah asked. The effect of the name was immediate and dramatic. Marcus's entire body went rigid, as if he had been struck. He turned slowly, and Sarah saw something in his expression that confirmed her suspicions even before he spoke. "Where did you hear that name?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "He was my mentor," Sarah said. "Thank you for watching this incredible story of redemption and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone ordinary was actually extraordinary? We read every comment and love hearing your stories. He retired 6 months ago, but he trained me, taught me everything I know about trauma surgery. He used to tell stories about his time in Afghanistan, about his best friend who served with him as a medic." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, Sarah could see decades of pain and regret. "His best friend's name was Marcus Thompson," Sarah continued gently. "He disappeared after their final deployment. Dr. Harrison spent years trying to find him." "Dr. Harrison always was persistent," Marcus said quietly. They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of 20 years of separation hanging between them. Finally, Marcus walked back into the break room and sat down across from Sarah. "How is he?" Marcus asked, and Sarah could hear the carefully controlled emotion in his voice. "He's well," Sarah replied. "Retired, living in Florida with his wife. But he never stopped wondering what happened to you. He never stopped hoping you were alive." Marcus nodded slowly. "That sounds like Jimmy. Always the optimist." "What happened?" Sarah asked gently. "Why did you disappear?" "He told me you were the most skilled medic he'd ever seen. You could have had any position in any hospital in the country." Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if he were seeing events from long ago. "Our final deployment was different," he began. "We were attached to a special operations unit, working in areas that officially didn't exist on any maps. The casualties we saw, they were beyond anything we'd dealt with before. Not just enemy combatants, but civilians caught in the crossfire. Children." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "There was an incident. a village that had been hit by crossfire between our forces and insurgents. We were the first medical team on scene. The casualties were extensive. Jimmy and I worked for 18 straight hours, trying to save as many as we could. Sarah waited patiently as Marcus gathered himself to continue. There was a little girl, maybe 8 years old. Shrapnel wounds, internal bleeding. I worked on her for hours, used every technique I knew, every trick I'd learned. For a while, I thought I'd saved her. Her vitals stabilized, she was responsive. I thought she was going to make it. Marcus's voice broke slightly. She died in my arms 3 hours later. Internal injuries I hadn't detected. Complications I should have anticipated. Jimmy tried to tell me it wasn't my fault, that I'd done everything humanly possible. But I knew better. I knew that if I'd been better, if I'd been smarter, if I'd made different decisions, she would have lived. Marcus, Sarah said softly, you can't blame yourself for. After that, Marcus interrupted. I couldn't do it anymore. Every patient I looked at, I saw her face. Every decision I made, I questioned. In combat medicine, hesitation kills. If you can't act with complete confidence, you become a liability to everyone around you. He looked up at Sarah, and she saw the deep well of pain that he had been carrying for 2 decades, so I left. I disappeared. I couldn't face Jimmy, couldn't face the questions, couldn't face the possibility of failing someone else the way I failed that little girl. But you didn't fail, Sarah said. You saved countless lives. Dr. Harrison told me stories about the impossible saves you made, the soldiers who are alive today because of your skills. And what about the ones who didn't make it? Marcus asked. What about the ones I couldn't save? Sarah leaned forward, choosing her words carefully. Dr. Harrison taught me something during my residency. He said that in medicine, we don't get to save everyone. The measure of a good doctor isn't perfection. It's the willingness to try, to give everything you have for every patient, even knowing that sometimes it won't be enough. Marcus smiled sadly. That sounds like something Jimmy would say. He never stopped believing in you, Sarah said. Even after 20 years, even not knowing if you were alive or dead, he never stopped believing that you were the best medic he'd ever known. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself seeking out opportunities to talk with Marcus. Their conversations took place during quiet moments, late at night in empty corridors, during her breaks in unused conference rooms, anywhere they could speak without being overheard. Gradually, Marcus began to open up about his years in hiding. After leaving the military, he had deliberately chosen jobs that required minimal human interaction and no medical responsibility. He had worked in warehouses, as a night security guard, in maintenance positions like his current role at the hospital. He had built a life that was safe, predictable, and completely removed from the medical world that had once defined him. But why here? Sarah asked during one of their conversations. Why work in a hospital if you were trying to avoid medicine? Marcus was quiet for a moment, then smiled ruefully. Maybe I couldn't stay away completely, he admitted. Maybe some part of me needed to be around the work, even if I couldn't participate in it anymore. You know you still could, Sarah said. Your skills, your experience, they're not gone just because you haven't practiced formal medicine in 20 years. It's been too long, Marcus protested. Medical techniques have advanced, protocols have changed. I'd be starting from scratch. No, you wouldn't, Sarah said firmly. The foundation is still there. The knowledge, the instincts, the ability to work under pressure. Those things don't just disappear. As if to prove her point. Fate intervened the very next night. It was 2:17 a.m. when the ambulance arrived with multiple trauma victims from a highway accident. The emergency department was already understaffed due to a flu outbreak, and the severity of the injuries quickly overwhelmed the available medical team. Sarah was working on the most critical patient, a young man with multiple injuries, including what appeared to be significant internal bleeding, when she realized she was in over her head. The patient's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and she needed surgical intervention that was beyond her current capabilities. The trauma surgeon on call was already in surgery with another critical patient and wouldn't be available for at least an hour. The patient didn't have an hour. It was then that she noticed Marcus standing in the doorway of the trauma bay. He wasn't supposed to be there. Maintenance staff were supposed to stay clear during active medical procedures, but his eyes were fixed on the monitors showing the patient's vital signs. Marcus, Sarah said urgently, I need help. This patient has internal bleeding that I can't locate. His pressure is dropping, and I don't have the surgical expertise to. Step aside, Marcus said quietly, moving toward the patient. Sarah hesitated for just a moment, then moved back to give him access to the trauma bed. Marcus's transformation was immediate and complete. The hesitant maintenance worker disappeared, replaced by the confident combat medic he had once been. His hands moved with surgical precision as he quickly assessed the patient's injuries. "He's got a lacerated spleen and possible damage to the hepatic artery," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional. "We need to get him to surgery immediately, but first we need to stabilize the bleeding." Working with skill that took Sarah's breath away, Marcus began the emergency procedures necessary to keep the patient alive. His movements were economical and precise, every action serving a specific purpose. It was like watching a master craftsman at work. "Pressure's stabilizing," Sarah reported, watching the monitors in amazement. "Good," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the patient. "He'll need surgery within the hour, but he should make it now." As the patient was wheeled away to the operating room, Marcus began cleaning up the trauma bay with the same methodical precision he brought to his janitorial duties. But Sarah wasn't about to let this moment pass without comment. "That was incredible," she said. "You saved his life." Marcus shrugged, but Sarah could see the satisfaction in his eyes. "Just kept him stable until someone more qualified could take over." "More qualified?" Sarah shook her head. "Marcus, what you just did, that level of skill, that confidence under pressure, that's not something you lose. That's who you are." The decision to contact Dr. Harrison wasn't easy for Marcus, and it took several weeks of gentle persuasion from Sarah before he agreed to it. Even then, he insisted that the initial contact be made indirectly. Sarah called her former mentor on a Saturday afternoon, choosing her words carefully. "Dr. Harrison, I have something to tell you that's going to be difficult to believe." "What's going on, Sarah? You sound serious." "It's about Marcus Thompson, your friend from Afghanistan." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah," Dr. Harrison said carefully, "I know you're trying to help, but Marcus disappeared 20 years ago. I've tried everything to find him. He's either dead or he doesn't want to be found." "He's alive," Sarah said simply. "And he's been working at my hospital for the past 20 years. Another silence, longer this time. "That's impossible." "Dr. Harrison, he has the tattoo you described. He knows details about your service together that nobody else could know. And I've seen his medical skills firsthand. They're exactly what you'd expect from the man you've described. If this is some kind of joke, it's not a joke. He's been hiding, working as a maintenance worker, trying to stay invisible. But he's here, he's alive, and I think he's ready to see you." The reunion took place the following weekend in Sarah's apartment, neutral territory, where both men might feel more comfortable. Sarah had offered to host the meeting, understanding that both Marcus and Dr. Harrison would need support during what was sure to be an emotional encounter. When Dr. Harrison arrived, Sarah could see the mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. 20 years of wandering, 20 years of guilt over losing his best friend, had taken their toll. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, looking as nervous as Sarah had ever seen him. Gone was the confident medic who had saved a life just weeks before. In his place was a man facing his past. After 2 decades of hiding, the two men stood facing each other across Sarah's living room, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then Dr. Harrison smiled, the same easy grin Sarah had seen in the old photographs. "You look like hell, Marcus." Marcus laughed, a sound Sarah realized she had never heard from him before. "You're not exactly a spring chicken yourself, Jimmy." And with that, 20 years of separation seemed to collapse in an instant. The two men embraced, and Sarah could see tears in both their eyes. What followed was hours of conversation, 20 years of catching up compressed into a single evening. Dr. Harrison talked about his career, his family, his retirement. Marcus talked about his years of self-imposed exile, his struggle with guilt and trauma, his gradual healing. Most importantly, they talked about that final deployment, about the incident that had driven Marcus into hiding. "I should have done more," Marcus said, the pain still evident in his voice. "That little girl, I should have." "Stop," Dr. Harrison interrupted firmly. "Marcus, I was there. I saw what you did. You worked a miracle, keeping her alive, as long as you did. Her injuries were beyond what any medic could have treated under those conditions. But if you had been better, you would have been superhuman," Dr. Harrison said. "Marcus, you saved dozens of lives during that deployment alone. Hundreds over the course of your service. You can't let the ones you couldn't save overshadow all the ones you did." Sarah watched as Marcus struggled with emotions he had been suppressing for 2 decades. This was the conversation he should have had 20 years ago, the support he should have received instead of disappearing into self-imposed exile. "I've spent 20 years punishing myself," Marcus said quietly. 20 years believing that I failed. "And you've spent 20 years wasting gifts that could have saved countless lives," Dr. Harrison replied, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. "Marcus, you were meant to be a healer. It's who you are at your core. No single case, no matter how tragic, changes that." As the evening progressed, Sarah could see Marcus beginning to accept what she and Dr. Harrison were telling him. The guilt and self-doubt that had defined his life for 2 decades were slowly being replaced by something else. Not quite hope yet, but the possibility of hope. 6 months later, Dr. Marcus Thompson returned to active medical practice as a trauma consultant at St. Mary's Hospital. His years of experience, both military and civilian, brought a unique perspective to the medical team. He specialized in training younger doctors in emergency procedures and high-pressure decision-making. Sarah often watched him work, still amazed by the transformation she had witnessed. The quiet maintenance worker had been completely replaced by the confident, skilled physician he had always been meant to be. But more than that, she could see that he was happy, perhaps for the first time in 20 years. Dr. Harrison visited regularly, and the 2 old friends worked together to establish a program training military medics in advanced civilian trauma techniques. They also counseled other veterans struggling with trauma-related guilt, using their own story as proof that healing and redemption were possible. As for Sarah, she had learned something invaluable about the nature of healing, not just of patients, but of the healers themselves. Sometimes the most important diagnosis was recognizing when someone needed to be saved from themselves. "You know," Marcus told her one day as they worked together on a particularly challenging case, "I spent 20 years thinking I was hiding from my past. Turns out I was just waiting for the right person to help me find my way back." Sarah smiled, thinking about all the seemingly ordinary people who might be carrying extraordinary gifts, just waiting for someone to notice, someone to care enough to ask the right questions. Sometimes, the most important stories are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look beyond the surface and see the truth underneath.